Hey guys, it's Christian, and today we're taking another look at Unraid, probably one of my new favorite operating systems for home servers and storage. It's really amazing to run a simple but also robust personal NAS at home. Some of you might have already seen the video where I used it for my new home lab storage server. But in this video, I want to go in a bit more detail on the setup and configuration of Unraid, because I think it has some really unique storage features that we just need to talk about. So this time it is not really about any hardware recommendations. If you're interested in that, you should definitely check out my first video, linked in the description. This time I will show you how to easily get started with Unraid, configure a storage array. We also take a closer look at some of the new features in version 7 of Unraid. So no matter if you're already familiar with Unraid and you want to know what's the best way to use it, or you have never used it before, this is gonna be the right video for you. Before we jump right into it, I quickly want to talk about another essential tool that improves your productivity for those who spend longer than they'd like looking for what they need when using Jira, the collaboration tool from Atlassian. Jira is really a great system for project management and agile software development, but it has some flaws. For example, the limited native search function, which is often a big pain point mentioned by the Jira admins and users, and I know this myself because whenever I have to use Jira at work, it is always hard for me to find what exactly I'm looking for. But luckily, with the enhanced search app for Jira Cloud, those days are over and you can optimize your entire search process like never before. The powerful JQL functions and keywords of the enhanced search app allow you to do much more advanced searches with greater precision that you can easily create by using its user-friendly query builder. This allows you to create custom queries and filters in Jira that your developers need for agile project management. For example, the linked issues of function to find all the issues that are blocking stories in your project, the issue in epic function to ensure epic completeness and prioritize incomplete tickets, or the added after sprint start function to better plan your work for sprint efficiency, just to name a few of the endless possibilities how you can use it. All these incredibly useful filters you can use throughout the entire Jira platform, so you can apply them across your projects, reports and dashboards, and easily share them with your entire team and gain better visibility of your projects to always know what is actually going on. So if you want to try out the enhanced search for Jira in your organization, you can do it now for 6 months completely for free. So there is nothing that would hold you back. Just check out the link in the description box down below and simply add it to your Jira Cloud account and enjoy all the advanced search capabilities in Jira. Alright guys, so now let's get back to topic, Unraid. If you're into building your own home servers and storage systems and you're searching for any operating systems, you might have already heard about it among all the other options, or maybe you're already a fan of it. But if you're entirely new to Unraid and you're wondering what is so special about this Unraid operating system and why you might want to use it instead of any other, then let me give you a quick overview. First, it is an incredibly user-friendly home server operating system, which makes it a fantastic choice for anyone into self-hosted servers and building a NAS at home on any type of hardware. So you can easily install and run it on a small desktop computer or a bigger home lab storage server, and it offers you versatile features for creating redundant storage arrays and pools using any type of hard disks or SSDs. For instance, you can easily bundle multiple hard drives together in an array, include up to 2 parity drives which protect you against any drive failures, so you won't lose any data when something bad happens to your disks. But it also supports some advanced storage file systems like BTRFS and, since the latest versions of Unraid, also ZFS, that you might know from other storage systems like TrueNAS, for example. I personally like ZFS a lot. I've made many videos about it before, and this is really an industry standard file system used in professional NAS systems, which offers high performance and throughput. But Unraid isn't just about storage, it also has some other very exciting features. For example, it allows you to easily run container applications through its very simple and intuitive web UI. You can easily build your own media server with it or your private cloud storage. It can also run virtual machines, enabling you to run multiple operating systems on one physical server. And furthermore, Unraid also includes other utilities like a VPN manager, community plugins, and many more things. So I would say it is a very comprehensive operating system that is tailored for home lab people like us, and definitely an interesting choice for building a NAS. If you'd like to get started with Unraid, you can easily download and test it for 30 days. After that trial period, however, you have to buy a license, and that's one important thing that you have to note about Unraid: it isn't free. Depending on how many drives you want to attach to your system, you can choose between the starter license that costs you around $50 at the time of recording this video, and this allows you to connect up to 6 storage drives along with the free operating system updates for 1 year. If you're planning to build a bigger setup or you like to expand your existing one, so then you can also upgrade to the Unleashed or Lifetime license, which allows you to attach unlimited drives. I personally have gotten the Unleashed license from the Unraid team for researching my videos, and I'm definitely going to expand this license once it expires, because I'm actively using it on my new storage server, and so far I'm quite happy with it. Of course, it isn't all perfect in Unraid. I mean, which system or software is that? But yeah, so far everything on my systems have been working great. What is also very unique about Unraid is that the license is tied to a USB drive, which is also used to boot the entire operating system. So yes, for Unraid you don't need any boot disks, you can all do it with a small device like this. At first, the idea of booting the entire operating system from a USB drive into the RAM seemed a bit unconventional to me, yeah. In fact, this is something people often criticize about Unraid, because if that USB drive is damaged, you will lose all your configuration and you might have to transfer the existing license to a new USB drive. But I also personally think this can be a huge advantage in some situations, because when I built my new storage server, for example, I was quite limited on ports for additional hard drives that I needed for storage, and the fact that this whole system fits on a small 2 GB USB drive was really great, because then I could use the internal NVMe slot on the motherboard for additional storage controllers. That was really amazing. However, because the USB drive is such a critical component in Unraid, it is also recommended that you choose a high quality USB drive. Some USB drives are blacklisted in Unraid and they won't work, especially some of the cheaper models that you find somewhere. Also, what some people said in the comments of my last storage server video, it is better to use a USB 2.0 drive instead of a USB 3 drive, because those ones tend to get quite hot. So yeah, the USB drive in Unraid is a special thing here. I would say check out the official documentation if you want to learn more about it. There are some great recommendations from the community on specific brands or models. But overall, I really like this system because it also makes the whole installation procedure of Unraid a bit easier, because you can easily provision the entire operating system with its configuration from your workstation computer. To install a new Unraid server, you just need to download the Unraid USB Creator tool, which is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux, so no matter which operating system you're using on your workstation, you will be covered. And then you just need to select your preferred version of Unraid that you want to install, configure a host name and an IP address for your new NAS, plug in the USB drive to your server, make sure to change the BIOS configuration to boot from it, of course, and that's basically all you have to do. I'm pretty sure if you have some general understanding of computers, you know how this works. And yeah, then your home server should just boot the Unraid operating system. And to configure everything on the OS, you can simply just connect to it from your workstation computer in the browser. Now, let's also go through some of the configuration settings that you should definitely have a look at in a new deployment of Unraid. As you can see, I'm using this on one of my virtual machines installed with a new version 7 of Unraid, which is currently at the time of recording this video in beta. But I think it is pretty close to the final release, and therefore I thought I will just cover it with a new version, because it also has some nice features here and there that I want to show you. But first, if you're logging into the web UI of Unraid, you can definitely see there's one thing that is a big problem, because the dark mode is not enabled in here, and that's the first thing that I need to show you. So let's first go into the settings where you can configure some general things about the operating system. And the dark mode is hidden in the display settings of the Unraid web UI. So here you need to scroll down to the bottom and select the dynamics color theme and change it from white to black. You can of course also choose any other ones. And if you apply this, you can see that the main window turns to black, but the top bar now becomes light mode. I don't know what is the reason behind this, but you can easily override those things here. If you choose a custom header text color and set this to the hexadecimal color code for white, it's also choose the same for the secondary color. And the background color we can set to zeros, so this is the color code for black. If we apply this, you can see that this top bar changes back, and now we have something like a dark mode. And now if you're new to this, in the dashboard you can also configure a couple of other settings here. For example, here in the top left window you can see some detailed statistics about your NAS system, the name and stuff, and you can customize those. If you go to the settings menu, this takes you to the identification system where you can give this a server name, you can give it a description and a model. So I would definitely choose a server name because this also becomes a host name of your fully qualified DNS record in the settings. We'll also go through this later. And what you can also do is you can give it a nice icon here. If you go to edit, you can change it to any image. You can also upload a custom one if you like, but I think for virtual machine there's also a nice image here as well. Also, you get some information about the system, the motherboard. As you can see, this is a virtual machine, so there is not so much hardware information. On my production system, that would look different. And also in the new version 7, they refined some of the metrics, how much memory and disk space is used by the different parts of the system, and the network shares, users, and drives that you have connected to the system. So if you haven't configured any storage array or storage pool, you're just seeing the unassigned disks, but of course this is a setting we go through later. Let's continue with some of the other general settings, because if you know me, you know that I always like to configure HTTPS whenever it's possible, because currently we're using a not secure connection where all the data, just like the username and password, is transmitted unencrypted over the network, which is not a good thing. So I would definitely set this up and configure HTTPS. So let's go into the settings and let's go to management access. So here it is important that you configure the host name appropriately, because as you can see, the local access URLs, and this is the host name .local. So the local top level domain you can change to the domain name in your network, whatever you're using. And here you can also disable Telnet. I would never enable this. It's also an unencrypted protocol. You can enable SSH if you like. And here you can also enable SSL or TLS. So if you enable this, you can see it is using a self-signed certificate by default. The problem with a self-signed certificate is that you might get a certificate warning in your browser. Of course, it would be better to issue trusted TLS certificates, but as you can see, Unraid doesn't have any ACME function where you can easily add trusted TLS certificates from Let's Encrypt or something like this, but you can easily just accept that this might be an insecure website. Still, if you see HTTPS in front of that, you can be sure that your data is still encrypted. It just means it doesn't have installed the self-signed certificates as trusted certificates in the browser. What is also pretty important, in my opinion, to configure first is some notification settings, because by default there are some important checks that you might want to run on your NAS. For example, you want to run smart checks, or you want to run a parity check. We will go through some of those storage things in a second here, but if you go to notification settings, you can configure notifications for different types of updates or system notifications that are enabled by default. What you can also do, and this is pretty cool, you can configure an SMTP settings if you want to receive an email for any alerts or notifications, but you can also configure some notification agents, for example, for Discord. So you can easily add a webhook in here, and when you enable the agent function, and you can enable this for different types of system notifications, then you get a Discord message, for example, when the parity check was successful or when there is a problem with that. So yeah, I like this notification system a lot. You always can see when something bad is happening to your disk array or something that might need your attention. What is also important when you do notifications is, of course, configure the date time options. So yeah, set your time zone correctly to whatever time zone you're located in, and maybe also use an NTP for time services. I'm always entering the time.nist.government from the National Institute of Standard and Technologies, but yeah, that's a personal preference. And what is also pretty cool in the settings menu, I can't show you this right now because it's a virtual machine, but this is new in the version 7 of Unraid. There is a power mode where you can configure the system for better power efficiency or any balanced operation, or also better performance to optimize or configure this system according to your preferences. Alright guys, so that's it about the general configuration settings for a new Unraid deployment. I think I could go on and show you different type of things like network settings or global share settings, syslog server. There are so many things in the system, but honestly, I don't want to overload you with information. I think the most critical thing why you would want to use a system like Unraid is storage, because you want to build a home server NAS. So let's go into the main section where you can configure all the different storage options. You can create an array of different disks and storage pools. If you're using Unraid on a physical device and you're adding a storage controller with your disks, if they are detected correctly, you would see them all listed here under the unassigned devices, and then you can plan out your disk layout. You can add those hard drives to a storage array or create a storage pool for different types of things. Now, in the latest version 7 of Unraid, there is now the option to completely skip the configuration of the Unraid array. In previous versions, you always had to have at least one disk attached to an Unraid array, otherwise you couldn't configure any storage pool or devices. But now with the version 7 of Unraid, it is more open to what exactly you want to configure for storage. So if you want to bundle a couple of those physical hard drives together in a virtual storage array, you can simply choose how many slots you need for your disk. You need at least 3 disks, because one of the disks will become your parity drive and the other one will become a data drive. So you can easily add as many data drives as you want, but it's only using up to 2 parity drives. Now, the parity drive is used for fault tolerance, so it doesn't store any data, meaning you can't use it to expand the size of your storage array, but it calculates the so-called parity data, which allows a reconstruction of any lost data from any failed drive. So that means if you have a couple of disks in your array and you're using them to store files, and one of those disks becomes damaged, you can use the parity disk and reconstruct the data from that lost drive. Of course, if you lose a second drive, then you might get a problem. So therefore you have the secondary parity drive to add more protection. Now let's just add a couple of drives to that storage array. I want to have 3 data disks, so I will reduce that to 5 slots and add 1 drive for the parity data. And if I go in here and click on that disk, I could now configure specific settings on that specific drive. For example, I could easily configure the file system type and set this to XFS, ZFS, BTRFS, or use encrypted versions of that. I could configure the spin down delay. We will also talk about that in a few seconds. Add any comments to this or configure smart options here. Now, automatically, the file system type is set to auto, and depending on what you configured in the settings, if you go to settings, disk settings, there is the default file system type that is usually by default XFS. Alright, so let's assume we have configured everything that we want to configure. We can now start up the Unraid array. So the parity disk's content will be overwritten. So this is a warning. Let's proceed with it. And once that became active, you can see that there are some actions happening on the disk. So any drives that don't contain any file system or data need to be formatted. So they are set to unmountable. So what you can do now is you can click on format the disk. So this will overwrite the data on the disk 1, 2, 3. This is now formatted with the XFS file system. You can now see what is the current used size of the data on that disk. And you could also now go in here and see what current files are located on that hard drive. Currently nothing is in here because we've just formatted it with a new file system, of course. And yeah, then you can basically use this as your storage pool. You can also see in the dashboard setting that you have a new section in here, the storage array, and see how much data you have here. As you can see, I have 130 gigabytes. Each of those disks has about like 40 or so. So you can see it's using the space of all the 3 disks minus the parity drive, because that is the disk space that is needed for reconstruction. And you can also see if the drives are active, if the smart checks are healthy. So if there is any problem detected with your hard drive and system, Unraid will notify you if you might need to replace it at any time. What is also pretty important about this parity check, as I said, this parity is really important for being able to reconstruct the files when any disk is damaged. And there is also a parity check that you should always do from time to time to verify if the parity data is still correct or if there is any file corruption. Therefore, it is absolutely recommended to schedule this parity check from time to time to avoid running into any problems. Let's go into settings once you have set up the storage array, and let's go to scheduler. So here you can schedule a parity check and enable this. The frequency is up to you, so if you want to be secure, you can set it to daily, but you could also be fine with running it weekly or monthly. Note, this might take quite a long time. So on my production systems, it takes about 7 or 8 hours to complete the parity check. So you probably want to do it somewhere when you're not accessing the files, of course, because otherwise it will decrease your performance. Maybe you want to do it weekly at midnight on Sundays, so when you're probably not doing anything in here. And of course, you can also enable write corrections to the parity disks so that it's able to correct any errors automatically. Alright everybody, so as you have seen, this is a pretty simple way to create a redundant storage array in Unraid. However, it isn't the only option for storage, because it is a very versatile system with different types of file system, and it also supports something that is called storage pools. To configure additional storage options or change any things in here, we first need to always stop the Unraid array, so that makes sure that nothing is written to your disks when you're configuring it. And here you can see there is also a second option, the pool device, where you can also add storage pools. Let's also give it a name, something like pool. Yeah, I'm not very creative, as you can see. Let's also select 4 slots here, because I might want to add 4 drives here. And there we have a new menu where we can assign additional drives to create a secondary storage pool. Again, to change any settings on the disks or on the pool, you can just click on one of the disks here and adjust any settings if you like. For example, what is pretty important here is the file system type, because as you can see in the storage pools, you don't have the XFS file system as an option. This is limited to XFS or BTRFS. If you're familiar with those file systems, we will talk about this later, but this gives you some different type of options for adding fault tolerance or redundancy. For example, I want to show you the ZFS file system. Here in the allocation profile, you can select how your disk layout should be. You can add a stripe, so which means it will stripe all the data disks together to one big storage pool. However, this doesn't give you any redundancy, because if any of the disks fails, then you will lose the data. Now, this for redundancy, it might be better to use a mirrored storage pool. So this is useful if you want to create 2 groups of 2 devices. So this is something like a mirrored stripe. So there are 2 drives that are mirrored, so meaning the disk 1 has the same data as disk 2. And then you stripe this with a secondary group, meaning you have a fault tolerance of 2 disks, but you can also only use the space of 2 disks. So this is not very effective for a 4-disk layout. Therefore, there is a better option for this. For example, the RAID Z function, which is one group of 4 devices. And this is a single parity layout. It is pretty similar to the Unraid array when I'm thinking about it. So it's using 3 drives for data and 1 drive for parity. But again, this is up to you. You can configure those different options depending on how exactly you want this to be, and I don't want to go into too much detail because those have also different throughput advantages. No, but you can also do in the ZFS file system, you can add compression, so this will effectively reduce the amount of disk spaces used. This is always recommended to turn on, yeah, because it always increases the read performance and is generally a best practice to enable the compression in ZFS. Let's apply this and we go back to the main view. You can see now the 4 disks become active, and you also have to format the disks, of course. In the main dashboard, you can also see this as a secondary menu point. So here you also have the same statistics like in the Unraid array. In the latest version 7, even though it is just in beta, they also added some other interesting ZFS features that I just want to show you. For example, if we go back to the storage pools, you can see we now have an options to add any sub-pools. For example, you can add an S-Log drive now, which is a separate intended log. This is making the writing to the storage pool faster. Or you can use a cache, the L2ARC, which basically uses another disk instead of the memory to expand the cache function for ZFS. It also increases the read performance for your pool when you don't have so much memory in your storage server. You can also add deduplication in here, hot spares, so a lot of features. I don't want to go into all of the details of ZFS in this video, but just know that the implementation of ZFS is getting better and better in Unraid. Okay guys, so those were some basic configuration settings about storage in Unraid, but I probably know what your next question is gonna be. How good is the Unraid array compared to a storage pool? Because technically you can use both to achieve fault tolerance for your data, but they are very different types of technologies. They both have their pros and cons, and ultimately it is up to you what you prefer using in Unraid, the proprietary array functions or building a storage pool with BTRFS or ZFS. There are situations where I would say the Unraid array is the better option, but also others where it is not. So let me explain. Now, if we take a look at some of the different technologies and file systems we have available in Unraid, I think it comes down to those two preferred options here. First, an Unraid array with XFS formatted disks, or using a storage pool with an advanced file system like ZFS. Just now, this is technically not complete, of course. There are also some other combinations possible. We'll get into one specific case later, but first, let's start with the Unraid array using XFS formatted disks, which is, by the way, the standard file system in the Unraid array. XFS is a robust file system created for handling larger files in high-capacity storage systems and well known for its scalability because it allows you to manage multiple terabyte file systems very effectively. However, XFS is technically just a file system, and it requires a separate RAID management, and that's why Unraid created their own proprietary system that they called the Unraid array for managing the parity and data drives, and that also provides a high flexibility and ease of use. And now it has several advantages, like you can mix any disk sizes in a single array, like for example add a 4TB drive, an 8TB drive, and a 2TB drive together. It does not matter for the Unraid array. The only thing that you should take care of is that the parity drive is also one of the largest disks in your array, otherwise it of course can't protect all the data. And you can also dynamically add or remove any disks from the Unraid array, which is super cool. It is not like a RAID system where you need all the disks to be present all the time, because if you just copy a file to the Unraid array, it starts filling up the first disk, and when it reaches a threshold, then it starts writing the next files to the second, and so on. And I think this is a big advantage, because if you start with a smaller disk and suddenly you need to expand your storage because you don't have any space left, this is not really a problem in the Unraid array. And it is also very power efficient, because if the files are spread around the different disks and you are now reading a file that is located on disk 2, for example, the disk 1 and any other disk, they don't need to be turned on at that time. So this is also called spinning down disks that aren't in use, meaning they go in a standby mode where they don't consume any power. And this, of course, can make a huge difference when it comes to power efficiency, especially if you've got many drives in your array. Unraid, by the way, also does that spinning down and up of those disks fully automatic, so you don't even have to take care about it. If you need any disk to become online, it will automatically spin the drives up. And after some time, when there is no transfer process happening, it will spin down the disks. However, of course, you also have some disadvantages in this kind of Unraid setup with XFS, like the XFS file system doesn't have any snapshot function, so you can't go back in time if you changed a file content and you need to restore some of the older versions of that file, or maybe you accidentally deleted a file completely and you want to get it back. That is unfortunately not possible. And I think this is also a huge disadvantage in any NAS system, especially when you're using it with other people. But also if you accidentally do something wrong, it can be a pretty ugly thing in Unraid array. Also, the Unraid array doesn't have any built-in caching function, and therefore the throughput is quite limited. Because just like I said, if you need to write or read the data from the disk, it usually is only done on one disk at a time. And of course, the slower the disk is, the slower is your throughput, which means in an Unraid array, it doesn't matter how many disks you add to your array, it's not getting faster. That's why it still can make a lot of sense to not use the Unraid array and instead create a storage pool with an advanced file system like ZFS, which offers a robust data protection by default. As I've shown you in the web UI, you can mirror any number of drives, you can create any RAID systems with different fault tolerance levels. It is a self-healing file system, so you don't need to schedule any parity checks that take a long time. And it can read and write the data from multiple drives at the same time, meaning the more drives you add to your storage pool, the higher the throughput can become. that's why professional NAS systems often use that kind of RAID systems, because it provides much better performance and throughput while still having a protected self-healing data pool. It also has many other advanced features, of course, like snapshots to revert files back to an older version, or a built-in caching system that can hold frequently used data in the memory of the system, which is of course much faster to read from than a hard drive. And it also supports file compression to reduce the overall space of the data consumed on the drive, or in automated encryption. So really advanced and very powerful features for a NAS. That's why I love ZFS as a file system so much. However, those come at a price of higher CPU, memory, and also power usage, because you can't spin down any disks. It's holding a lot of data in the memory, and things like compression and those other advanced calculation features, they of course require CPU usage. Also, because the disk layout is not changeable, you can't dynamically add or remove any drives from the pool. You always have to recreate it. So if you want to change the disk layout, you have to destroy the entire pool and create another one, which means you also have to copy the data somewhere else when you do that. Now, before I tell you my personal recommendation on which option might be better for you, it also has to get a bit more complicated, because there's also another option not so many people might be familiar with, because I just covered the option of using the XFS file system in the Unraid array compared to ZFS. However, the Unraid array can also be used in combination with any other file systems as well. So you could think about some kind of hybrid option where you're using the Unraid array, but format the drives with a ZFS file system, which means you don't create a storage pool, you just create the Unraid array just like you normally do, but the file system configuration of your individual disks is ZFS. Now, this is kind of a special case where you benefit from some advantages of the ZFS file system, such as snapshots, compression, and encryption, and combine it with the advantages of the Unraid array, where you still can dynamically add or remove any disks with mixed sizes, and you can spin down disks for greater power efficiency. However, of course, you're still quite limited to the throughput of the Unraid array, so probably even worse than using XFS, because ZFS has also some overhead. And of course, you also have to deal with the higher CPU and memory usage of ZFS. So as you can see, it is not really easy to decide which storage option is the best for you. They all have their pros and cons. But I will tell you what I think about it and in which scenarios it might make sense to use the one or another option. Because as with every technology in IT, it basically comes all down to the use case and what you are trying to achieve. For example, if your use case is to build a fast and robust storage for critical data and you need high performance and throughput, and you're willing to accept that it's gonna cost you more, then I would definitely go with a storage pool using ZFS. I mean, there is a reason why we use those RAID systems in professional IT, because there it is all usually about great performance and reliability, and if that is your use case at home, I would even think about using the Unraid array. However, if your goal is a bit different and you want to build a NAS server for home usage, and you want to have some flexibility because you want to dynamically mix any drives of any size, and you're okay with that it might take a bit longer to read or write the files, and you're also into building a power efficient system, I think the Unraid array is an amazing option. I mean, don't worry too much about the speed in a home usage. Even though it is not as fast as ZFS can be, we are still talking about a very powerful file system called XFS, and that is pretty fast. Of course, when you're accessing your NAS files with many people at the same time, the Unraid array becomes not so great, yeah? But as I said, in home server scenarios, that is usually not the case. For example, I'm storing all my video files and my virtual machine backups in an Unraid array. It is just perfect for that use case. Alright guys, so I know this was a lot of information, but yeah, file systems and storage can become quite confusing and complex, I know this. But I think it's better to make this video as complete as I can, so I will tell you all the different options that you have and then let you decide what options might be better for you using an Unraid array or a storage pool. And let us also go into using those storage pools. So how do you actually access this? How do you create shares and access the files on the disk? So let us first go to user menu, because here we have to configure a user for shares access, because the root user is mainly just used for management access. It is also best practice to not use any administrative user to access any files on the system. So therefore we have to create a different user. I will just give it the name Christian, for example. You can also add a custom image in here, add a custom password, and then create this user. So when you configure your storage array or your storage pool, no matter what you're using, you can add multiple user shares to get access to the data. So when you click on add share, you can give this a name, for example, storage 1, and then choose the primary storage. So do you want to have that share available on the Unraid array or on a storage pool? If you have multiple storage pools, it will add the name of the pool in here. For now, I will just use the Unraid array as my primary storage, and I will use the allocation method high water. So this means it's beginning to write the data to the disk with the most available space until it reaches a threshold, and then it moves to the next disk. And the thresholds are somehow based on the size of the largest disk in the array. Again, I'm not going into too much detail. I'm also not an expert in this, but just know that the high water is generally the default and the recommended option for efficient management of disk space. You can also include or exclude specific disks, so you can granularly configure where the data is stored, even in the same Unraid array. Then you can add the share. So when you add the share, you also enable different options that you can configure below. For example, the SMB security settings. I know the NFS security settings are currently missing in here, so that's something I've forgotten. So let's go into settings and enable NFS. NFS shares, again, commonly used in Unix-like operating systems. For example, this is great to make the drive available for any Proxmox backup target, or as a network storage for any Linux machines, macOS as well, if you like. So let's go back to the storage share here. And then you can see the NFS security settings option. To make this available on the network, you have to enable the export function, and then you configure the security settings. Public means the share is available to all of the users in the network. Secure means it is only available to authenticated users, and private to only specific users. Now, in NFS, you don't have a built-in user authentication. However, what you can do is when you enable this, you can see there is a new menu point that is adding a rule. For example, you can make this available to all IP addresses in the network by using an asterisk and then adding the NFS flag. For example, the RW for read and write access, some other ones. I don't want to go into all of the detail here, but you can also make this available to only one IP address, for example, this IP address, and then you configure the different NFS flags and so on. So yeah, if you're working with Linux operating systems, you probably know how to configure this. If not, well, you don't have to use it. If you're using a Windows computer or even a macOS computer where you want to access the shares over the network, you usually would use the SMB security settings anyways. So this protocol is mainly common in Windows clients, but also in macOS. So you can enable the export, the yes/time machine settings. This is a macOS specific feature. So if you want to use it for macOS time machine backups, you can enable this. And then you can also configure the security options, set it to public, secure, or private. If you select private and apply, you also enable other menu points below to enable the read-only or read-write access for your SMB users that you have created in the user menus before. So you can very specifically and very simply create permission level access, define who has access to that share. So I really like this system a lot. It is very simple and easy to configure those privileges or permissions for network share access in Unraid. And again, you can create as many shares as you want. You can add another share, maybe only on one disk, and on the other disk create a different share with different permission levels and so on. And then if you have created it, you can just look up your NAS using the IP address or the DNS name in your browser. I can show it to you on Windows because I'm a Mac user, as you should know. But yeah, for example, if I try to connect to this test server, then I can just use this to store any data on the disk. So yeah, maybe try to copy a large file, and then the file is copied to my new storage server. Alright guys, so that's it about Unraid. I hope you got a better understanding of the NAS system now and how to effectively use the different types of storage options. In some of the next videos we might also explore some other parts of the system, like deploying some container applications with Docker or running virtual machines. We will see what makes the most fun to experiment with. And by the way, I'm also working on a comparison video to put Unraid against TrueNAS Scale, the other NAS operating system that I've used in my home lab. That's gonna be definitely an interesting one. But yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. A big thanks goes out to my Patreon supporters. You guys are just the best. And of course, I will catch you in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.